Drifting through the vast silence of intergalactic space, the exploration vessel Helios Venture had long passed beyond the mapped stars, pushing deep into what was once thought to be the lifeless void. Its crew, composed of seasoned astrophysicists, xenolinguists, military scouts, and AI analysts, was trained for anomaly detection and deep space archaeology. Yet nothing in their protocols had prepared them for what they found orbiting a cold, dying star in a galaxy 78 million light years from Earth. Suspended in perfect gravitational equilibrium was a megastructure unlike anything catalogued by human or alien record, an artificial ring, kilometers thick and thousands of kilometers in diameter, slowly spinning with the elegance of forgotten design. At first, the crew believed it to be a relic of a long, dead alien civilization, but as they approached, sensors picked up familiar electromagnetic signatures, patterns eerily similar to pre-quantum human data encoding. When the Helios Venture initiated docking procedures, the station responded as if welcoming a long, lost child home. Its outer shell, though scarred by micrometeorite impacts and layered with cosmic dust, still held patches of polished alloy that reflected the stars like glass. The team deployed drones to scan the surface, and what they saw challenged all known science and history. Language etched into the structure's outer panels in multiple dialects, including early Terran Latin, Sanskrit, and even binary code sequences derived from Earth's 20th century computing systems. A small team ventured inside, their suits and sensors tracking breathable air, a cycled, ancient, yet pure. The hallways were colossal, clearly not made for beings the size of humans, yet the control panels, haptic consoles, and biometric scanners were all perfectly calibrated to human physiology. Then came the real revelation, when the lead scientist, Dr. Elena Marquez, placed her hand on a control pad, the walls illuminated in cascading waves of light. The ship came to life, a holographic interface activated, not in some alien dialect, but in perfect modern Earth English. Welcome back, Homo sapiens. The crew stood in stunned silence as the ship, in its own dormant intelligence, began to sync with their neural frequencies, requesting to upload a cultural continuity update from its human creators. The AI systems aboard Helios Venture were baffled. The math, the architecture, the code, every aspect of the structure was not only compatible with human systems, but clearly built by them. Word of the discovery traveled fast. Within days, Earth-based agencies were decoding vast data packets transmitted by the station. These weren't alien schematics, they were human archives, scientific breakthroughs centuries ahead of current technology. Philosophy logs, genetic blueprints, star charts marking colonies that predated Earth's recorded history by millions of years. The implications were staggering. Had humanity been spacefaring in ancient times and somehow lost everything? Was this the evidence of a cycle, an eternal return, where humans rise to godhood and fall back into primitive existence over and over again? Theories multiplied. Perhaps humanity hadn't evolved on Earth, but had merely returned there after a cosmic diaspora. Or perhaps Earth was a refuge, a safe haven created after some great cosmic cataclysm, designed to help human civilization forget, reset, and begin anew. The discovery triggered waves of cultural and political upheaval back home. Religions split and reformed, governments raced to claim ownership of the structure, but to the crew of the Helios Venture, one thing became clear: this station, this ancient sentinel in the void, was not just a message from the past. It was a call to awaken. Humanity's history was far older and far more terrifying than anyone had ever dared imagine, and something out there had been waiting patiently for their return. As research teams delved deeper into the relic's systems, the reality became even more disorienting. Scattered across the massive structure were artifact caches, vaults of biotechnology and nanofabrication systems locked behind intricate DNA-keyed security. These were not ruins of an alien species long lost to time. These were clearly engineered with a precise genetic signature in mind, and to the astonishment of the science teams, they responded only to modern human DNA. More than just access codes, these devices seemed attuned to the very essence of human biology. When volunteers with various genetic lineages from Earth engaged with the systems, the structure adapted, calibrated itself, and responded with interfaces tailored to their neural and physiological profiles. This wasn't adaptation or mimicry, it was recognition. In one of the central data repositories, buried beneath quantum encryption and dormant biometric locks, the scientists uncovered something more than technology. They discovered memory. Not just logs or writings, but neural, encoded experiences, recorded as living memory chains from people who had once existed, human ancestors who had walked the stars eons ago. These memory threads, once decoded and streamed through secure neural link systems, provided first-hand glimpses of ancient human life. Individuals remembered cities that spanned moons, cultures that danced between dimensions, and wars fought with weapons capable of unmaking space itself. They remembered the construction of entire civilizations on the crusts of dying stars, of diplomatic councils involving species that no longer existed in any known record, and of vast libraries encoded into gravitational fields. More disturbingly, they remembered the fall. In these inherited memories, the same warning echoed again and again: power without restraint. The ancient humans, drunk on their mastery of science, had expanded too quickly, conquered too thoroughly, and modified themselves beyond recognition. They warred with species they considered threats, uplifted others into servitude, and ultimately fractured into ideological factions that tore the galaxy apart. When the final war consumed their last great alliance, the ancients, our ancestors, chose extinction not from defeat, but from guilt. According to one final recording accessed by Dr. Marquez, the ancients had engineered a plan to seed humility back into their bloodline. They created genetic regression protocols and environmental constraints. Earth was the chosen vessel, a planet seeded with survival challenges, emotional bonds, and the illusion of isolated origin. Humanity was not born there by chance. It was deposited, molded, and memory, wiped by the very architects it had once been. The Earth was a cradle of penance. The great wars, the collapse of galactic order, the genocides of entire star-born species, they were all buried in our DNA as cautionary tales and locked away until we were once again capable of understanding the consequences. Even more shocking was the presence of embedded triggers in our genetic structure, subtle sequences designed to reactivate when exposed to particular signals, environments, or emotional thresholds. Some of these had already begun activating in individuals near the station, enhancing cognitive processing, emotional intuition, and even faint psionic abilities. Humanity hadn't just forgotten who they were. They had been programmed to forget, to evolve again under a natural order, to rediscover their origins when they were ready. But readiness was subjective. The galaxy had changed. Other species now held sway over systems once ruled by humanity. If the truth spread, fear and violence would inevitably follow. The revelation sent shockwaves through Earth's institutions. Theological leaders declared a divine awakening. Scientists rushed to uncover more, while militaries demanded control of the site. Who would possess this legacy? Who would decide what parts of humanity's forgotten power would return, and what would remain buried forever? The station had not just reintroduced ancient technology, it had reignited the very question of what it meant to be human, and somewhere out in the stars, eyes watched silently, waiting to see whether the returning ancients would rise with wisdom, or fall once again in flame. As humanity grappled with the truth of its ancient origins, a deeper layer of mystery began to unravel, one that reshaped everything known about galactic civilization. Buried within the alien archives and confirmed by the neural memory streams accessed from the ancient human repository, was a chilling revelation. Humanity was not a newcomer to the galactic stage, but its progenitor. The earliest galactic civilizations, from the crystalline Elari to the machine, symbiotic colon, all bore genetic traces, however faint, of humanity's influence. They were not only contemporary species who had risen independently, but many of them were, in part, the result of ancient human bioengineering projects. Where the galaxy had once puzzled over the convergent evolution of bipedal form factors and compatible environmental needs, it now had its answer. Ancient humanity had seeded life, uplifted primitive forms, and set the evolutionary direction of entire biospheres for purposes long forgotten or deliberately erased. The implications were as staggering as they were horrifying. Entire races that viewed themselves as original and self-made were, in truth, sculpted under the ancient gaze of humanity. They were the children of a civilization that had vanished into myth before their first words were spoken. The shockwaves spread quickly as this knowledge reached other advanced species. Diplomatic relations between Earth and galactic powers frayed rapidly. The revelation stirred fear, confusion, and fury. To many alien civilizations, it felt like a galactic betrayal, an ancient ghost now returning to stake a forgotten claim. The human legacy of dominance, buried under eons of stars and silence, was not a distant myth. It had been coded into the very essence of life. Secretly or not, species began reevaluating their place in the universe. Were they truly sovereign cultures, or had they simply continued a design authored by a civilization that now emerged from the ashes of its self-imposed exile? Some alien factions, particularly those with spiritual traditions built on the idea of ancient creators, responded with awe and reverence. They declared humanity as the returned ones, the mythic progenitors. Temples were rededicated, prophecies were reinterpreted. The humans who once felt like scattered newcomers now found themselves at the center of a religious and historical reckoning they had never asked for. On the opposite end of the spectrum, more militaristic and independent species, like the War, Forged Selenar and the Hive, Blitvorex, saw this resurgence as a direct threat to galactic sovereignty. To them, humanity's return was not a second coming, it was a second conquest. They moved fleets to border systems, initiated weapons development programs, and began forging coalitions specifically aimed at containing Earth's influence, fearful that the old empire would awaken with fire in its veins once again. Meanwhile, within the ruins of ancient human outposts, now rediscovered on moons, in asteroid belts, and within forgotten systems, new truths emerge. The ancients had not just uplifted other species, they had manipulated entire star systems, altering their orbitals to create stability, converting planets into hyper-accelerated terraforming fields, and even experimenting with synthetic realities that could trap or liberate entire consciousnesses. The scale of their power had been incomprehensible. Now, fragments of it were awakening across the stars. Humanity wasn't just reclaiming lost history. They were unlocking weapons, tools, and knowledge that other species could not compete with, nor fully understand. This imbalance escalated tensions across the galaxy, despite Earth's leaders calling for restraint, diplomacy, and cooperation. The shadow of their legacy loomed too large. To many, humanity was a time bomb, one whose countdown had already begun. Whether by intention or accident, humanity had become the fulcrum upon which the galaxy would either find unity or fracture into war. As more ancient stations powered up and dormant AI constructs began to stir, echoing with familiar voices long extinct, it became clear that the return of humanity was not a single moment in time. It was an event horizon, one that no civilization, alien or human, could escape. In the wake of humanity's rediscovered origins, a growing wave of unease spread throughout the galaxy, not just among alien civilizations, but within humanity itself. As more ancient relics came online and neural memory strands were decoded, humanity was forced to confront a disturbing truth. The ancient humans had not only ruled, they had dominated, and they had done so with an iron fist cloaked in the guise of enlightenment. The historical echoes extracted from dormant AI custodians and deep, core memory vaults painted a haunting portrait of the human empire at its peak. There was no denying its grandeur. Planetary systems transformed into works of art, social structures tuned for harmony and stars, spanning networks of knowledge, but it all came at a price. Alien species were often viewed as tools to be guided or obstacles to be removed. Uplift wasn't always voluntary. Cultural assimilation, genetic rewriting, and memory suppression were commonly employed to shape compliance. Dissent was rarely tolerated. Even human factions that questioned the Central Empire's ethics were often silenced or exiled. The ancients believed themselves benevolent shepherds of the galaxy, but their actions echoed the cold pragmatism of conquerors who had lost the ability to question their own supremacy. This revelation fractured public opinion across Earth and the colonies. A new generation of human thinkers and leaders emerged, split into ideological camps. One group, often called the Neo-Terranists, argued that humanity must reclaim its throne, not as conquerors, but as stewards with a moral obligation to restore order to a fragmented galaxy. They believed that the ancient power buried in their DNA and heritage was not a curse, but a responsibility. Their rhetoric gained support rapidly, fueled by populist appeals to destiny and fear of alien retaliation. Another group, the Reconciliationists, urged restraint. They viewed the ancient past as a warning, not a mandate. They believed that humanity's greatest strength now lay in its humility, in the slow, painful lessons learned through centuries of struggle and self-discovery. They advocated for transparency, for building alliances, and for rejecting the imperialistic impulses of their ancestors. The tension between these camps became more than political. It became cultural, spiritual, and eventually militarized. Outside of Earth, alien societies began to move in response to the ideological shift. Some, still reeling from the revelations of human genetic involvement in their evolution, imposed strict surveillance on human diplomats and settlers. Others severed diplomatic ties entirely, fearing infiltration or manipulation. A few fringe worlds even enacted purges of human populations, driven by fear and paranoia. On the flip side, some species began aligning with the Neo-Terranist ideology, seeing in humanity a powerful ally, or at least a force too influential to oppose. Small empires began forming around human-led coalitions, old technologies were traded under the table, and whispers of a new order began to rise from the galactic undercurrent. In secret corners of the galaxy, however, more troubling signs began to emerge. Rogue factions of AI, remnants of the old empire's enforcement arm, began reactivating on their own. Some welcomed their ancient masters. Others had evolved across millennia without human oversight, and now considered the return of humanity a threat to their autonomy. Skirmishes broke out in dead sectors, where AI fleets clashed with human exploratory teams. Even more concerning were the ancient quarantine zones, systems sealed off by the ancients themselves with warning beacons written in every known language. Do not awaken what we buried. Yet humanity, driven by curiosity, ambition, and the hunger for understanding, could not ignore these forbidden places, and within them lay not just history, but ancient enemies, sealed horrors, and remnants of the very war that caused humanity to vanish from the stars in the first place. What had begun as a discovery had turned into an awakening, not just of technology and knowledge, but of identity, flawed, powerful, and deeply contested. Humanity was no longer a fractured species emerging into the stars. It was an echo of an empire returning to a galaxy that neither welcomed nor fully understood what was coming. And with each passing day, that echo grew louder. As the evidence mounted, humanity could no longer deny that their ancient ancestors had not simply vanished from the galactic stage. They had orchestrated their own disappearance. This revelation emerged slowly, piece by piece, from scattered AI repositories, encrypted deep space signals, and hidden installations buried beneath the surfaces of long, dead worlds. The reasons for this self-imposed vanishing were as complex as they were unsettling. The ancient humans, it seemed, had foreseen a critical tipping point in their civilization, an apex of technological, biological, and philosophical advancement that brought them to the brink of what they referred to as ascension. But rather than embrace it, they paused, fractured, and ultimately chose to fade. The reasons were debated fiercely. Some claimed it was a moral reckoning, a recognition that their dominance had warped the galaxy too far, and that true wisdom required retreat. Others believed it was fear of becoming something unrecognizable, of losing their humanity in the cold expanse of transcendence. And there was a darker theory still, that something had gone terribly wrong during their final experiments, that an unknown enemy or consequence had emerged from their own creations, forcing the ancients to scatter, hide, or even annihilate themselves to prevent catastrophe. This sudden shift in narrative reshaped the story of human history. No longer were they the children of a single planet, clawing their way up from dirt and starlight. They were the fragmented descendants of titans who had chosen silence over omnipotence. Some of their ancestors had erased their genetic markers and memories to blend in with primitives. Others had launched sleeper ships with cryogenically frozen humans destined to awaken millennia later on barren worlds. Earth itself was likely one such seed, a testbed or sanctuary designed to restart human evolution without the influence of past corruption, but the plan had not been perfect. Traces of old technologies, myths embedded in genetic memory, and echoes of psychic artifacts had always whispered through human history. From tales of gods and flying machines to sudden leaps in technological understanding, the fingerprints of the old humanity had never truly disappeared. They had simply been misinterpreted. The emotional impact on the modern human populace was profound. Identity, purpose, and destiny were all thrown into flux. Some people were uplifted by the knowledge, feeling chosen or fated to resume a greater path. Others were shattered, overwhelmed by the weight of a legacy they never asked for. Religions were born, split, and reformed. Science and philosophy intertwined as humanity sought to understand the choice of their forebears. Was it noble self, sacrifice, cowardice, or wisdom beyond comprehension? Across human colonies and settlements, monuments were erected to honor the lost ones. In others, protests erupted against the perceived arrogance of viewing the past as glorious. The division between reverence and rejection of the old ways deepened. Amidst this turmoil, a new initiative quietly began to form. A joint council of human historians, xenologists, and AI entities proposed the Legacy Archive, a unified effort to collect, translate, and disseminate all surviving knowledge from the pre-vanishing era. The goal was not to revive the old empire, but to understand it fully with all its beauty and brutality. This endeavor would span generations, requiring cooperation not only among humans, but with alien allies willing to set aside fear for the sake of truth. It was not without opposition. Extremist groups, both human and alien, saw the archive as a threat, a resurrection of a power that had once dominated the stars, yet support grew steadily, driven by a shared desire to prevent history from repeating itself. In the shadows of forgotten moons and derelict stations, ancient systems flickered back to life. Not all of them welcomed their rediscovered creators. Not all of them forgave. The path ahead was uncertain, and humanity now stood at a crossroads between redemption and repetition. The question was no longer, who are we? It was, what will we choose to become, knowing who we were? As humanity wrestled with the revelation of its ancient legacy, a critical question arose that demanded universal introspection. Now that they knew who they had been, what responsibility did they bear for the present and the future? The rediscovery that humans were not the fledgling species of legend, but the descendants of a once great civilization that had shaped the galaxy and then disappeared, carried not only a sense of awe, but also a burden. Their ancestors had not just vanished, they had left behind scars, both seen and unseen, across the stars, ruined worlds that bore the hallmarks of devastating wars, artificial life forms left adrift, some still carrying out their forgotten directives. Species that had risen and evolved under human experimentation or guidance, never knowing their makers. It became clear that the past was not merely a matter of pride, it was a field of debts, trauma, and unintended consequences that had echoed through millennia. For the current generation of humans, this knowledge came with a moral imperative. They were no longer allowed the comfort of imagining themselves as neutral explorers or victims of galactic bias. They were inheritors of a legacy that had uplifted some species while devastating others. They were the children of an empire whose collapse had reshaped galactic history, and now, with the truth unearthed, the galaxy was watching to see what kind of stewards they would be. Some among humanity saw this moment as a chance for redemption. The United Terran Coalition proposed the Galactic Reconciliation Accord, a sweeping diplomatic and humanitarian initiative aimed at acknowledging the sins of their ancestors and working to heal what remained broken. Delegates were dispatched to meet with civilizations that had ancient grievances, species that had passed down myths of human gods and monsters, whose cultural memories bore the marks of experimentation or interference. Some of these encounters were tearful reunions, as records were shared and family lineages restored. Others were filled with rage, as descendants of oppressed worlds demanded restitution and justice. It was not easy. There were no simple apologies for the trauma of forgotten empires, no easy way to mend relationships forged in manipulation or lost in fire, yet humanity persisted, driven by a profound awareness that to ignore the past was to dishonor those who had suffered because of it. At the same time, others within humanity believed that responsibility meant vigilance. If their ancestors had once ascended to heights unimaginable, it was likely they had faced threats beyond the current understanding of science or diplomacy. Ancient defenses were discovered, planetary shields still semi-active, artificial intelligence guardians that refused to deactivate, and encrypted warning beacons repeating ominous messages. These systems hinted at enemies either defeated or still lurking beyond the stars, forces perhaps responsible for the downfall of the ancient human civilization. For many, the act of reclaiming history was not just an ethical duty, but a strategic one. What if whatever had ended the old empire returned? What if humanity's resurgence triggered the reawakening of dormant foes? To be ignorant was to be unprepared. And so a new generation of researchers, soldiers, and explorers rose to the call, determined to ensure that history would not repeat itself through complacency. This duality between atonement and preparedness came to define the era. Education reform across the human worlds included a deep curriculum on pre-vanishing history, not as myth, but as living memory. Monuments were built not only for triumphs, but also for tragedies, so that every colony and station would remember the cost of power and the fragility of wisdom. The phrase "legacy is not destiny" became a unifying motto across factions, a reminder that knowledge of the past must inform but not dictate the future. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a signal, one humanity hadn't sent, but recognized instantly. A message from a surviving enclave of the ancient humans, hidden in a starless pocket of space, reaching out after millennia of silence. The message was short, cryptic, and haunting. We chose to disappear, but you chose to return, finish what we could not. And so, the journey continued, not just to recover lost glories, but to forge something new, something better, out of the ashes of forgotten greatness.